The United Nations and the US government have staked a claim on the most important religious spot in the whole world. And it's not in the Middle East. It's actually in a small town called Independence in the state of Missouri. And it's not really talked about. It's kind of hush and quiet because they don't really want people knowing about it. They more or less want to keep it hidden. This sign right here that says UN Peace Plaza is marking what's called the UN Peace Plaza, and it is the only memorial in the world to the peacekeeping forces of the United Nations. I'll talk a little bit more about what exactly that means. And then, but what's interesting is just right here, this patch of grass has another sign on it, which is called the Mormon Temple Lot sign, or the Mormon Temple site. And it says on this sign right here that it was dedicated, this site, to the temple in the city of Zion, where the Lord will come to his people in the last days, referring to the second coming of Jesus Christ, which also indicates that this location and that these signs are marking this location as the promised land, the land that was originally promised to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And so if this is the place where Jesus Christ will reign from after his second coming, if this is the promised land that was promised to Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph, then why is the United Nations only memorial in the world to its peacekeeping forces on this location? And why did President Harry Truman, upon signing the United States into the United Nations, come to this exact spot to make that announcement? I'm going to unpack all of this, and we're going to see that the UN calling this specific location their Peace Plaza is physical proof that the Bible and Book of Mormon are describing a literal reality, and that this is truly the place where Jesus Christ will return and reign from on the earth. First, let me drive you around this area for just a second and show you the specific spots that we're going to be looking at. So right here on the very west side of Missouri, literally just right outside of the city called Kansas City, is where this UN Peace Plaza is located in the city called Independence. And everything that we're going to look at is right in this area, so I'm going to drop us right here into my car on this international drive with a view straight ahead of the UN Peace Plaza. So right here straight ahead is the UN Peace Plaza sign. We'll come back to that in just a second. We're going to take a right here in my car. And then on our right hand side is what is called the auditorium with the big huge dome on top of it. On the left hand side, straight in front of that auditorium, this grass section over here, this is what is called the Mormon Temple Lot, or the temple site, which is where that sign is located that I showed you, which we'll see in just a second. Okay, now I'm going to make a left-hand turn right here, putting the auditorium at our back. And if I pause this, right here on our left, this whole grass lot is what's the Mormon Temple site, the Mormon Temple Lot as it's often called, and right here is that sign that I already showed you, which I'll show you more of. We'll come up here to this stop sign and we'll take another left just to finish kind of doing a circle around this Temple Lot site. So on our left hand side is that whole patch of grass with the Mormon Temple Lot sign, and then on the right hand side right here you can see that there's this old castle type structure. And then now I'll take this little left right here to this little side street, and now this really starts to help us orient ourselves right here. And these are the main things that we're going to look at right here. This UN Peace Plaza right here, this auditorium right here, and then this grass lot, which is the Mormon Temple site. Here's an older picture of what this place used to look like. This lot used to have some trees on it and stuff. They got the auditorium cropped out of this, and you can see that there's that stone castle right there in the background also. So now we're going to do a full breakdown of what this blue sign actually means. And this might seem silly, this might seem bunk, this might seem made up, but that's why I wanted to tie the United Nations into this, because it's not just the Mormons are saying this is a special place. The United Nations has made this place their only memorial in the world to the peacekeeping forces of the United Nations. I'm going to explain what all that means, but like if this was just straight silliness, then what's the UN doing here? So this blue sign says it's a temple site, and on August 3rd, 1831, Joseph Smith Jr. prophet and founder of the Church of Christ. Nowadays, most people will think of them as the Mormons. Joseph Smith founded the Mormon Church. That church was originally called the Church of Christ. Now it's mostly known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the church that is headquartered in Utah. But Joseph Smith, the founder of that church back in the 1800s, he went to this site with other church leaders, and they dedicated it for the temple in the city of Zion. And it says that this church believes the Lord will come to his people here in the last days. And the story goes that Joseph Smith thought this was a special site and dedicated it for a temple in the city of Zion in the last days for the coming of Jesus Christ, is because, according to Joseph Smith, he was told by God that this was that location. God said that the land of Missouri is the land which he's appointed for the consecration and the gathering of the saints. He says this is the land of promise, and this is the place for the city of Zion. And then even more specifically, he said that God, speaking to Joseph Smith, the place which is now called Independence is the center place. And so if you look at this map right here, just like Joseph Smith was told that this is the center place for the city of Zion, I've put it as the very center, the center place, and then I've expanded the circle out so that the edge of the circle touches the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, Missouri. And the reason that I did that is because the St. Louis Gateway Arch is the gate or the entrance into the city of Zion. Originally in the Old Testament of the Bible, God promised the promised land to Abraham, but then he also promised it to one of Abraham's children named Jacob. And when God gave that specific location of land to Jacob and told Jacob what that land actually is, Jacob said, "How dreadful is this place? This is none other but the house of God. This is," in his words, "the gate of heaven." And then it says that he marked the house of God location, the promised land location, the gate of heaven location, with a very specific piece of architecture, which the Old Testament says was a pillar. And just about 3 miles away from this gate, this gateway arch, is the world's tallest Corinthian pillar, called the Grand Avenue Water Tower, which is actually Jacob's pillar still standing, still marking the original location, the only location of the house of God on earth, the gate of heaven location. And when you read about the St. Louis Gateway Arch, it says that it is a symbol of the opening of the west, of coming from the east and entering into the west. And in Matthew 24 in the New Testament, it describes the second coming of Jesus Christ as the sun coming out of the east and shining to the west. So you literally have the world's tallest Corinthian pillar, which is Jacob's pillar that he marked the house of God, the gate of heaven location with, and it is right next to the St. Louis Gateway Arch, which is a gate or an entrance from east to west. So both of those symbols sit right on the edge of this circle as the entrance from east to west into the city of Zion, with the center place being the UN Peace Plaza or the Mormon Temple Lot. And that's why Joseph Smith took the Mormons to this Independence, Missouri location to dedicate a temple for the city of Zion for the return of Jesus Christ in the last days. And what's interesting is when they got there, the United States government, through the judges and through the governor at that time, issued what's called an extermination order against the Mormons. Like a straight up kill the Mormons, get them out of here, and there's no repercussions. Now let's take a look at the UN Peace Plaza, and I'll explain why a Peace Plaza and why the United Nations are here. Let's start with this sign right here that's on their plaza. And it says right here, on June 27, 1945, in the auditorium, that big gray building with the huge dome on top of it, President Harry Truman formally announced that the United States was a signatory to the UN. In other words, in that huge auditorium dome building, the President of the United States, after signing the UN, the United States into the United Nations, went to that auditorium at this specific location, and that's where he formally made that specific announcement. And as part of his speech, he said, "History has bestowed on us a solemn responsibility. We failed before to give a genuine peace. We dare not fail this time. We must not repeat the blunders of the past." So admitting that something went seriously wrong here before in their eyes, and that they don't want that to happen again. And my take on that is that letting Joseph Smith and the Mormons get to this location and know what this location is and dedicate it for the return of Jesus Christ, that's their blunders of the past. That's why when Joseph Smith and the Mormons got there, they said, exterminate them, kill them, get them out of here. We do not want this happening. We cannot have this happening. And that's what they're saying right here is, we failed to give a genuine peace last time. We dare not fail this time. We must not repeat the blunders of the past. We cannot let God's people build at this place in preparation for the return of Jesus Christ. And if we look right here on the United Nations Peace Plaza Wikipedia page, it says right here, upon signing the United Nations Charter in San Francisco on June 26, 1945, President Harry Truman arrived in Independence, Missouri the next day and addressed a crowd of about 10,000 people in the auditorium to make the announcement that the United States is now part of the United Nations. Why? Such an important thing, right? The United States, the world's power, signing into the United Nations. The place you go right after that to announce it, the Mormon temple lot in small town Independence, Missouri. And you're talking about blunders of the past and not repeating those same mistakes. And you're saying those things on the site that was dedicated for the return of Jesus Christ. And the United Nations has branded itself as an organization that is about making the world a better place, when that's actually not what it's doing. That's just its branding, that's just its messaging, that's just its storytelling, that's just its public relations, that's just the image that it wants to achieve, but that's actually not what it's up to. What it's actually about is controlling and enslaving everything. Just like the United States federal government has united all of the states under its control, the United Nations unites all the nations under its control. And that's why if we look right here in the Charter of the United Nations, formally ratified by 5 of its permanent members, and those 5 permanent members are United States, China, France, Soviet Union, and United Kingdom. All countries that are supposed to be opposed to each other. China, definitely, that's communist. We're not supposed to be part of that. UK, that's the Great Britain Empire we supposedly broke away from. Soviet Union, that's more communism. But the more you look into the Charter of the United Nations and what the United Nations actually does and what they're actually up to, it's just controlling the world. I mean, we saw it in 2020. They were largely the people that were behind all the stuff that happened. They were the ones saying, yep, we're going to do this, this, and this. And the nations that have signed into them, that are united under their governing umbrella, they just do what they're told. So the United States signing into the United Nations and partnering with China, Soviet Union, Great Britain, UK, that's very strange. And then a million times more strange than that is that the second after President Truman signs the United States into the United Nations, he goes to the auditorium on the Mormon temple lot, the city of Zion in the last days for Jesus Christ's return location, and makes that announcement and talks about we can't repeat the blunders of the past. And this United Nations Peace Plaza right here is described by its creators as the only memorial in the world to those persons serving in the peacekeeping forces of the United Nations. What are the peacekeeping forces of the United Nations, and why is there only memorial in the world to their peacekeeping forces on the Mormon temple lot in small town Independence, Missouri? And if you look into the United Nations a little bit more, they used to be called the League to Enforce Peace. Once again, enforcing peace. What a strange thing. When does God in the scriptures ever enforce peace? In fact, what he does is he lets things get super, super messy, and he has a master plan that ultimately at the end judges and balances everything again. But until then, it's just super messy, and he never shows up enforcing peace. He lets it all be super messy. But the devil, now that's someone, and all of his followers, that's a group that does want to enforce peace. Right here it says that the League to Enforce Peace should ensure peace by eliminating causes of dissension, by deciding controversies by peaceful means, and by uniting the potential force of all the members as a standing menace against any nation that seeks to upset the peace of the world. Translation: anyone or anything that is messing with our control and our rulership of the world, get rid of it. And that's how we enforce and maintain our peace. We cannot commit the blunders of the past again that messed up our peace. We cannot let God's people know the truth, know the true locations, and work towards the coming of Jesus Christ, because that messes up our peace, our rulership on earth. We don't want that happening. So really what we're seeing here is the devil and his church operating through the United Nations and the United States government to accomplish what they call peace. And what does the Bible say about peace? I promise you, it doesn't say what you think it says about peace. For example, right here in Thessalonians 5:3, it says, "When they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them." Ezekiel 13:10 says, "The evil ones have seduced my people, saying peace, and there was no peace." Ezekiel 13:16, "The prophets of Israel which prophesy concerning Jerusalem, which see visions of peace for her, and there is no peace, saith the Lord God." Over and over again in the Bible, it's saying that the leaders, the evil leaders, are leading the people astray. They're telling them peace and safety when there is no peace and safety. And God warns, when you're being told peace and safety, peace and safety, peace and safety, destruction suddenly cometh upon you. So the United Nations, the League to Enforce Peace, and their only memorial in the world to the peacekeeping forces of the United Nations, what are we talking about? We're not talking about God. We're talking about the other one, the opposition. We're talking about the devil and his church. They're the ones saying peace and safety. They're the ones saying peace plaza. They're the ones saying only memorial in the world to the peacekeeping forces of the United Nations. Just like we saw in 2020. We're doing all this for peace and safety. And we saw all freedoms get stripped. Even churches closed, temples closed, stay home, locked down, peace and safety. And if this whole Jesus Christ thing and this ancient promised land thing and this Book of Mormon and the Mormons and the temple lot in Missouri and the second coming of Jesus Christ, if all that's just a silly story, what is the U.S. government and the United Nations and their only memorial in the world to the peacekeeping forces, what's that doing in this small, specific location? The truth is that this is the promised land promised to Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph Smith was correct about these locations, and that Independence, Missouri is the center place for the city of Zion for Jesus Christ's return. And the UN and their Peace Plaza, their only memorial in the world to the peacekeeping forces, that's the devil's church saying, yeah, we know what this spot is, and we got this spot, and we're doing everything we can to enforce our peace and ensure that our blunders of the past never happen again. AKA, we're doing our best to hide God, his promised holy locations, and to deceive people about this whole story and that it's right under our noses, hiding in plain sight. And there's also this statue of a girl right here on the United Nations Peace Plaza, which is in mockery telling us that all of this is true. Because in the scriptures, God refers to this ancient covenant that he made with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph and all of their children as a marriage, where they're the wife or the bride and he's the husband. In other words, the symbol of that ancient covenant, the symbol of his people and of his church, is a woman. And she shows up in stone holding a bunch of God symbols all around this country, which I show you in a lot of my previous videos. And if you want a very full breakdown of that, you can check out my Stone Woman playlist on my We Zombie Rod of Iron channel, which I'll leave linked in the description of this video, where I show you that there's this robed woman that shows up all over the country that is the symbol of this ancient covenant, of this marriage that God made with his people, and part of that is a specific promised location of land. And that's why the devil's church, via the United Nations organization, has put this girl with dove also in this United Nations Peace Plaza, because that's their mockery symbol of that covenant of God's wife. And you'll notice that her feet aren't really there. Her feet are standing on top of the world, but her feet aren't really there. They get kind of shadowy and vague. That's because the devil's church doesn't have a proper foundation. Their foundation is just all built on lies. When our foundation is supposed to be Jesus Christ, the chief cornerstone, and if we build on him, we can never be moved or toppled down or tumbled over or anything like that. So this whole thing here, the Mormon temple lot, the United Nations Peace Plaza, it's all saying this story is real, these locations are real, Jesus Christ is coming again, but for now, currently, it's all in the hands of the opposition.